Hello there, let's spend an afternoon with Journey. This is a very bizarre game. It's also a very special game to me. I remember just after the PlayStation 4 released, I bought a PlayStation 3 on the cheap to play a bunch of the exclusive games, and this was the game I was most looking forward to playing. And it was worth it, you know? At the time, I really hadn't played anything like this. Something that was more about the experience and the artistic intent than about clicking on heads. You know, not that there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with clicking on heads. But that is why this was so jarring to me. The story is primarily told through these little slates on the walls, and one interesting quirk of this game is that there is no written language. Strangely enough, the game has a subtitles option, and we can actually give that a look. Give me a second. No, I can't. Oh, that's cute. They sit down when you're paused. The game has a subtitles option, but I don't know if it will ever be used, because everything is spoken through these little symbols here are like what these creatures spoken, but they don't it's not a language that you can translate. So it's a lot more about just the implicit, I guess, expression of the game. So this technique of using sort of general symbols as opposed to a language for storytelling is something that I don't remember seeing before this game, but I've definitely seen afterwards in games like Hyper Light Drifter, where that's also used for a similar sort of artistic intent. The developers, that game company, initially developed a game called Flow, and it was actually a thesis project, and Sony saw this and they were impressed by it. It was like a Flash game, and it had grabbed the attention of Sony. This really shows you the age of this tale, that it was on Flash. So Sony signed a 3-game contract, and the first of that was Flow, the second was a little game called Flower, both of which did reasonably well. Flow, when it first released on a PlayStation 3, in 2007, it was the most downloaded game on a PlayStation network, and it became a very prominent, early digital game, and especially an early PS3 game. You know, the PS3 wasn't that long in the tooth, and yet it had a major artistically oriented game sell incredibly well. So here we have one of these other creatures that you can encounter. Journey, as the third game in this deal, was given a year for its development. And then it was given another year. Then it was given another year. And then it took slightly longer, so 3 years and a bit, and Journey released. And in that time, the studio grew from, at the time, 7 people to 18. Despite the beauty of the game and its sereneness, it was incredibly stressful to develop. Seemingly, they were constantly worried for time. They were constantly worried for not having the manpower and being able to complete this project that was very ambitious for them. And seemingly they resolved this issue mostly by working less, they said. They were getting annoyed at each other and that they weren't meeting these goals and that people weren't doing well enough. So instead, they decided to, I'm not kidding, be nicer to each other and work less. And what they found is that that improved their communication, and it also made it more about, as the quote goes, with an interview with IGN, it was about being human and having that human communication with people and actually listening to them, which I think is very beautiful for a game like this, particularly when you can encounter these other creatures in the world and your only source of communication is one button. It's that calling out, that sort of singing with the symbol. It's oddly fitting that a game that was so stressful to make became less stressful and not quite serene, but less stressful to do because of communication. And then the game ends up being about exactly that. Despite how nice that story sounds, this is still a studio that very nearly actually did end up going bankrupt towards the end of its development. Thankfully, at the point where they released it, it sold incredibly well, like blew flow out of the water. It was the fastest selling PlayStation Network game, at least in the US for sure. And this is beating out all other third-party games like AAA games, and also beating out all of Sony's own offerings on the PlayStation Network. Well, this was technically published by Sony, but it wasn't developed internally by Sony. And that's pretty impressive. This was really the point where, for only a few years at this point, indie games had begun to demonstrate how they could compete in the industry. Games were getting more expensive to develop. The increased graphical fidelity of these systems meant, like the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, meant that just making games look to what people consider the acceptable standard became so much more expensive, the level of detail and fidelity required. And that made it harder to enter this industry. And then you have games like Super Meat Boy and Braid and Flow. Braid was sort of the first big game where not only was the gameplay really good, but people could start to see the artistic merit in indie projects. And it sold very well, so it was clearly in demand. And Journey was sort of a reaffirmation of that. You know, a console exclusive, digital only game initially was outselling all their other digital offerings without nearly the same marketing push or weight behind it. That's kind of incredible. So the game initially released on the PlayStation 3, that's definitely where I played it. It was later ported by an external company to the PS4 shortly after that released, and now it's on PC. And the PC version was not published by Sony, it was published by a company called Annapurna Interactive. And if you haven't heard of Annapurna, I don't blame you. It's only recently I discovered who they were, and I found out that a couple of the games I played were actually published by them. Now, they only did the PC version of Journey, but in games that they published from the start, you know, you've got Sayonara Wild Hearts, which is a fascinating pop album represented in video game form. You've got What Remains of Edith Finch. It's like little vignettes of people's lives that you experience. It is a fascinating game. And I also played a game called If Found, which is about a trans person's experience in Ireland in the 90s. Unusual games, to say the least. And it's impressive that a publisher can exist in this space that is willing to take risks on such strange product. I think if there's a company to watch out for, it's them. Definitely. You can play this game and just enjoy the atmosphere without trying to dig deep into it, you know? From the research I did, I found so many different theories about what the game means. And while I do agree with some more than others, I also recognize there's really no verdict on what is correct. Even if the developers had said, this exactly is what it's about, this is why you're traveling to this mountain in a distance. Death of the artist means that if people decide that's not what they agree with, well, what is the artist's word worth? And there's something kind of liberating about that, especially when a lot of the videos that I make, I'm always worried that I'm going to say something and people will point out in the comments, you missed this vital detail, or you interpreted this incorrectly, that's not what they were going for. And they may well be right. But I also have to remind myself that a lot of things are up for interpretation when it comes to media. And you take a game like Journey, which is a lot more liberating in that sense, and with that in mind, it's kinda a relief to play a game like this and not have that stress. In terms of the developer, that game company, after Journey, which was their third game, you know, we're talking 7 years between this and the next game, which was called Sky Children of the Light. And that game released on mobile. And seemingly, it had quite a good reception. People quite liked it, which is nice. I have played a little bit of Flow and Flower, and they're definitely interesting games, but in my opinion, they lack the impact that Journey has. And then some of the people that came from that game company made their own studio called Giant Squid Studios and released a game that you may have heard of called Abzu, which definitely has its similarities to this. Giant Squid Studios also recently released a game called The Pathless, and I think that's had quite a good reception. So maybe that's another one I should check out. It is an absolutely beautiful soundtrack. I adore it. This game knows how to use its themes, like its musical themes. It knows how to grab you with really rousing musical moments, and it knows how to integrate that well with gameplay. This soundtrack was so good for me that I bought the CD. This was like one of the first games where I bought the soundtrack. I know CDs aren't exactly cool and hip anymore, they were hardly cool in 2012. You know, it was all iPods going on to streaming services around that point of time. But I just really wanted to own it, you know? A reminder of how good the soundtrack is. Being able to sit down and just listen to it once through. And because this is a more dynamic soundtrack, it had to be sort of rearranged to suit a linear format. So it's quite an interesting way of re-experiencing the game. You definitely remember moments of the game in your head as you're hearing each movement, each section. And since then I've experienced that with a whole lot of other games. I love video game soundtracks, and while I don't listen to a whole lot of orchestral, I will always defend the Journey soundtrack. The composer, Austin Wintory, has done an incredible job. You have the cello solo, which is meant to represent the player, according to an interview with Austin Wintory. And that's a technique he'd use later in because he did a soundtrack for Assassin's Creed Syndicate. The two protagonists, Jacob and Evie, are represented by the violin and the cello, respectively. And it's quite an interesting way of doing it. Mixing the two instruments in circumstances where both of them are present, and then beautiful solo pieces outside of that. And that's a pretty nice soundtrack. I don't think it has the same emotional weight as the Journey soundtrack, Mostly because Journey was written alongside the game. Because the game took 3 years to develop, he spent 3 years composing for it. And he cites that as quite an important experience to getting the expression of it right. And it seems to have paid off, because just like Journey was successful, the soundtrack at the time was the second highest charting game soundtrack ever on Billboard. But considering it was only beaten out by Guitar Hero 3 with a licensed soundtrack of already released songs in the past, that makes this the best selling, in 2012 at least, video game original soundtrack. And what a way that this game and others like it have paved for original soundtracks to be considered in higher regard. So many games now release soundtrack CDs, where before it was maybe a pre-order bonus. Oh no! Jesus! Oh no, my ribbon is way shorter. He stole my energy. Ah, that is just rude. No, you were kidding me. No! Oh, I just noticed we have different symbols. Oh, and that's our little symbols that we communicate with. Alright. I think I'm closer to where I was before, but look at that! Oh, the way it like trails around is beautiful. Oh no, I'm not gonna make it! Ah, you came for me. Hey! Teamwork. That's wonderful. No! Okay. No, I'm coming back. No, 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 no. No! Oh. No! Oh, God. Are you okay? We need to go. We need to go. Get in, get in, get in. No! Oh. Are we going? Oh, we're going. Okay. Come on. Into the side, into the side. God, we've come this far. I'm not gonna leave you now. Alright, across, across, across. Yes! Nice work. Huh. Oh, come on. You can make it. Just get in the side, get in the side. Yes! Go, 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 go. Go, don't go so wide. Don't go so wide. I'm coming to you. Side, go up the other side. I can't say anything. I can't tell them. Because all I can do is yell this symbol. Okay, I'm coming. Yes! Come on! Get in! Get in! Get in! Get in! Get in! Get in! No! You were so close! You had it! Come on! Come on! Come on! Just go! Here! Here! Woo! Oh! God. We can do this, come on. Oh, that gave me chills. My voice broke. Oh, that gave me chills. The game doesn't mention it, but those creatures I encountered who looked like me were other people, other players. And it's weird sharing this experience with somebody who I don't know their name, I don't know where they live. All I've done is shared one symbol with them, and yet it resonates deeply with me, you know, it tugs on my heartstrings to know that I'm never gonna see them again, and that we've shared something. Through every moment, through the depths with the snake and losing my ribbon and having them help me up over the ledges, to them struggling to get past the wind on the bridge, and us doing it together. The connection with someone you don't know is honestly incredible. You're these two creatures that are small in the grandeur of this world, but together you push through it. And because you don't know them, it brings down your walls, your defenses. You don't even know their username, There's no discrimination, no preconceived notions about them. They are just another person. And you feel a connection to them because you don't know them. And when you look at the way that the story depicts a civilization being created and destroyed, it kind of represents how that division separates, but then everyone's the same. We're all in the same experience. That connection to somebody you don't know is in many ways a healthy interaction. Because is that not what therapy is? Being able to speak to somebody without the burdens of needing to care for a friend or family member, scared about what they'll think, or changing their perception of you. You can speak to somebody with no pretense of any of that. And now we're back at the start, back where we began. We've been to the mountain, it's just taken us back. So have we achieved anything? Well, did we not meet all of these people? Did we not share these moments? It's cyclical, but it's all about the journey, not the destination. And it's in the title, it should be clear, it should be obvious, but you don't realise that's what it means until it's done. With all the Middle Eastern architecture, it represents this idea of like a pilgrimage. Lots of people return to areas, for example in the Middle East, in order to reobtain their culture. Much like as you traverse through this world, you understand the culture that came before you. And with the whole thing of the spirits that you speak to, and the idea that you're leaving your body at the end and returning to the start, and the idea of reincarnation. It's the hero's journey. But it's the hero's journey as a way of like reflecting on culture and self. And it can do that because of the vagueness that I mentioned before. Because it's not clear and precise, you can interpret that how you want. Some people interpret it as a metaphor for life. Some people consider it as culture and societies. Personally, I think it's about yourself. It's about your own journey. When I first played this, I hadn't made the Game Revo YouTube channel. But this obsession with my future means that I'm always worried about this destination and never the journey. How can I expect to go through this kind of change if you're not focused on the journey? This is the only game where as soon as I finished it, I played it again. The first time that I played it, I met somebody at the beginning and we shared the game together until the snow area, in which they sat down and dissolved, and the final celebration was bittersweet. The second time, it was with somebody who had learned all the ropes and showed me the hidden trinkets and secrets everywhere in the map, and I gained a great appreciation of the game's story and environment thanks to that interaction. Two very different journeys, one destination. With that in mind, it's time to take that journey again.